Welcome to the Ad Nauseam podcast, where classical gourmands everywhere can finally get their fill. Join us for a delectable discussion of Greco-Roman civilization stretching from the Minoans and Mycenaeans through the Renaissance and right down to the present. And now, ladies and gentlemen, here are your hosts, Dr. David Noe and Dr. Jeff Winkle.
Welcome, Ad Nauseam listeners, to episode 140 of our little podcast. As always, my name is Dr. David C. Noe. I am down here in the basement, the bunker, Vomitorium South, with my good friend and sartorially sophisticated co-host, Dr. Jeffrey T. Winkle. How are you, Jeff?
I'm feeling good today. Yeah, it's kind of bright and sunny out here.
Yes.
And the promise is, as I understand it, kind of higher than normal average temps for the next couple of weeks.
Spring-like.
It is.
I have thus far carried through on my resolution for the most part.
Yes.
Of not complaining about the bad weather.
Excellent.
And,
this makes it easy.
It's been so easy.
Yeah.
If we can just get to March 1,
I know.
Right?
That's that's that threshold.
Correct. Then the possibility of bad weather invading the mitten-shaped peninsula is relatively small.
That's right. It's very true.
Exactly. So we're in the home stretch.
Yep. As I understand it, the official groundhog in Punxsutawney,
right.
Pennsylvania.
What did he say?
He did not see his shadow, so that means spring is imminent.
Really?
So I'm hoping he's right this year.
Okay. Are you a Bill Murray fan?
I am a Bill Murray fan.
And you like that movie?
I like that movie very much.
Yeah.
How about you? Have you seen it?
Yeah, I've seen it once and I liked it.
Yeah.
I didn't necessarily see where the great charm lies. I needed someone to explain it to me.
Yes.
But it was nice. It was a nice movie.
I often use it in my. I've shown it once in my world religions class, to kind of as a view of kind of Buddhist reincarnation.
Yes, the transmigration of souls.
Yes.
Back you come.
Yeah, exactly. Hey, how are you feeling down there?
I'm doing pretty well, thanks. Yeah, today's a lovely day. Today, as you know, is my day off, typically Monday, because a heavy work day for me as a pastor is Sunday.
Right.
I usually squeeze quite a bit of work into Monday, but it's work of a different kind.
Gotcha.
Like this podcast.
Yes, indeed. Yeah.
So I like that quite a bit. And
Excellent.
a little note, not really a show note, but sort of a, cultural observation. You might like this. Yeah. On Friday, we were traveling for one of my children's sports games. We went up to Big Rapids.
Yes.
Have you been up there?
I have. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. I've never noticed that the rapids were any
larger,
bigger than the Grand Rapids, but
there must have been a small window of time when cities in Michigan were rapidly looking around for the best sorts of rapid names.
That's right, and they were in competition.
Grand, big,
right.
so forth, biggest.
Right.
But I saw something that truly, truly delighted me.
What was that?
It was a laser tattoo removal shop. A laser tattoo removal shop, and guess what its name was?
What?
No Regrets. No regrets.
Nice. Oh,
that's brilliant.
That is brilliant.
I want to find the person who came up with that and get them on this program.
That's fantastic. I'm thinking that the laser tattoo removal is what we would call a growth industry.
Absolutely. Yes, I want to buy into that.
Yeah, no doubt.
Because people have to have some second thoughts, right, about that Greek or that you hear some horror stories of people putting Mandarin on their back and it says something like, the donut is stale. And they wanted it to say something like virtue forever.
Right. Yeah. I've encountered a handful of people. I remember back in the days when I was teaching Greek in the classroom of students that were very proud to show me their Greek tattoo. And it's something's almost always off.
That's right.
Right.
How do you control that wincing, cringing response? Are you a good actor? Can you hide it?
I can usually hide it.
I can't.
Right. So, I mean, but somebody's made just more or less a permanent mark on their body and just say, well, that doesn't say what you think it says.
No.
The accent shouldn't go there.
Oh, well.
Right. Yeah. Hey, I thought of it. I was thinking this morning.
Lay it on me.
I need to come up with a Dave-worthy opening.
Okay.
Sometimes you have these little wonderful kind of humorous.
You think they're humorous?
Well,
actually?
I do. Right. So,
okay.
Mine goes like this. I'll try to keep it short. So I was talking with an old high school friend of mine.
Yes.
And we were reminiscing about the yearbooks.
Okay.
And and how the yearbooks, they would at the end of the year they'd have like the mock elections
for
people. And I remember they came to me.
Most likely to be elected.
Exactly right. And so they came to me and they wanted to be a part of it. And
okay.
I wanted nothing to do with it. Right.
So this is the setup for a joke, isn't it?
Exactly.
Okay.
Right. And so they said, no, we really want you to be a part of this. And I asked them to, you need to withdraw my name from consideration. But you know what? They put me in anyways, the most likely to secede. What do you think?
I like it.
Yes.
I like it.
Right. So I thought of that. I thought that's something I could hear.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So maybe we can develop that. No, I won't. But right before the Civil War, right?
Yeah. Right.
All the states got together and signed each other's yearbooks. In South Carolina, it was just
most likely
again and again. Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Very nice, Jeff.
Thank you.
Very nice. So what are we talking about today?
We're talking about John 1 verse 1, right?
Yes.
Right.
The Gospel of John, chapter 1, verse 1.
We're getting into some linguistic nittis grittis.
That's correct.
Right.
Some philology, some theology, and I would say some very interesting history with one of my favorite individuals, one Desiderius Erasmus.
Yes.
The Dutch scholar, humanist, philologist extraordinaire. We're going to throw in a little bit of Aquinas, a little bit of Augustine, Novatian, Tertullian, Cyprian, and Theodore Beza.
Fantastic.
So it's a who's who of what's what.
It is indeed. But to kind of boil this down,
Boil this down, he says.
We're
How'd you get a pun in there, Jeff?
What's that?
It's the name of the woman whose article
I didn't even.
we're basing our entire episode on.
Unintentional.
Yeah.
I mean, man, I'm bebotting and
you're
scatting all over the place.
It's that shirt you're wearing.
Is that what it is?
Listeners, if you could see what Jeff's wearing now, it is so impressive. I don't know what those little things are. Are those one of those life preservers on there?
It's like a life preserver mixed with some kind of floral.
I would say it's
pattern.
a life preserver crossed with a mistletoe.
Something like that. I think I put it on this morning. I was thinking this is kind of foreshadowing spring.
It's great.
Right,
I like it very much. It's something that you might wear, when traipsing along behind Bacchus through the Sylvan Glades.
Exactly.
Did you pick that out yourself, or is that a Beck pick?
This was something that Beck picked out for me.
So she just brings it home in a Coles bag and says, "Here, put this on."
More or less.
And you say, "Okay."
That's really very little exaggeration what you just described.
Okay.
But back to
our
topic today.
boil it down. You were saying
we're really talking about one word, right? This is an article that's really grappling with that, and this has always kind of fascinated me and bothered me. Is the word logos.
Yes.
Right. In the beginning was the word, is
That's
the way
correct.
that's usually translated. And this article, Ms. Boyle, really talks about the history of the difficulty in translating that word into Latin.
That's correct.
And considering the kind of the wide range of concepts that are embedded in that word. Right?
Absolutely. So Jeff, we don't have a shout out today, do we?
We do not, sadly. Right.
Any theories as to why?
I mean, I think our audience is cerebral and often kind of maybe a little bit introverted and maybe a little shy. Again, there's nothing wrong with that. But
no.
This is, we take this opportunity as a gentle prod to let us know who you are. We want to celebrate you.
That's correct. We want to give you your 15 minutes of relative obscurity.
That's right.
Okay, so as we said, today we're dealing with an article written by Marjorie O'Rourke Boyle. And she's a scholar who published this in 1977, and the title is Sermo, Reopening the Conversation on Translating John 1:1. It was published in Vigiliae Christianae, September 1977, and it's published by Brill. And what it's looking at is John 1:1, as you say, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. So that's the common translation. Let me read the Greek here from the Nestle Aland 28, the 28th edition. It sounds like this. Is that all right?
Yep.
Okay. En archein ha logos, kai ha logos ein pros ton theon, kai theos ein ha logos. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. Mm-hmm. So the entire episode today is going to center around this word, like you said, halogos, and look at two candidate translations for this. And we're going to look at the long tradition of taking it as halogos as sermo, which you could translate as speech, conversation, something like linguistic self-disclosure, and how that was replaced by Jerome with the more mundane word verbum, or verbum, if you want to say it like that. Then along comes Erasmus in the 16th century, and he reintroduces sermo, and this opens up a can of worms.
That's right, right. And to stretch a little bit closer to the present day, I believe that at the end of the article, Boyle suggests that maybe it's time to bring the Sermo back.
Yes.
And so Sermo to verbum, back to Sermo.
That's right.
I thought this was really interesting. And before you you dig into this,
right.
When you sent me this article and I read it, I was reminded about how I've always disliked that English translation of word, right? In the beginning was the word. Right. And and once I started to learn Greek and you understand logos and kind of all the stuff that's embedded in that, it made me dislike the translation word even that much more. And so maybe at the end of this we could talk about, would there be a better English translation?
Well, I don't know.
It's really difficult.
It's highly fraught because halagos, as the article and the history of the discussion proves, is such a rich word.
Yeah.
It's such a rich concept, and there have been suggestions that there are Heraclitean, that is the philosopher Heraclitus, there are Heraclitean references and allusions in what John is saying. That seems to me unlikely that the Apostle John would have known that.
Yeah.
But the word had a tremendous history before John chose it for the beginning of his gospel.
Right.
And how are we possibly going to reflect that idea in English speech?
Right.
So as we'll see when we discuss it, one of the solutions to this has simply been to leave it untranslated.
Oh, okay. Yeah,
and just say, in the beginning was logos. And logos was with God, and logos was God.
Yeah, and I think Boyle mentions that was even the choice of some early Latin translators that don't even bother and just keep it in the Greek.
Yeah, and a potential analog for that is the noun ta baptisma, right? Ta baptisma, baptism. Mm-hmm. So there's the Greek verb baptizo. And a lot of debate about exactly what does that mean, right? And I get asked this question a lot because, as a Reformed Protestant, I believe that there's, a proper mode of baptism. But I know persons who would be historically called Baptists or Anabaptists, and they have a different view of that, right? So I often get asked, what does the word literally mean, right? Because they think that, I guess, if there's just kind of one lexical entry, that will solve all the controversies. Obviously, it's much more complicated than that. So what did the early church fathers do with that? They pretty much refused to translate it. They brought it directly into Latin by a transliteration, right? Mm-hmm. There are other words that existed, like mergeo, mergere, to put underwater and so forth, submergeo. But no, they just, and the words to sprinkle, if it means that.
Yeah.
But no, they just kept it as baptizo, right?
Yeah.
And then the nouns like baptismum that came from it. So there's precedent, I'm saying, for just punting, right?
Yeah.
If you can punt on a loaded word and just refuse to bring across the meaning, just to leave it. Right?
Yeah. I was wondering, before we dive right into the linguistic details, I wonder if you could say a little bit about kind of the early intellectual climate that's going on here. So, I mean, we're going to hear a lot of names, Cyprian and Tertullian.
Right.
I mean, what's happening here in the 2nd and 3rd centuries in terms of like the intellectual development of Christian thought?
Right.
And could you kind of set the stage of where we're at?
I can try, but these are going to be the broadest brushstrokes.
Okay,
right?
That's fine.
So anyone who's listening and is either more expert than I, which no doubt there are many, who want something deeper, understand these are broad brushstrokes.
Okay.
And if you email me, I can point you to more specifics. These are the books you'd want to read and so forth. So that's just a caveat. I got to be careful.
Sounds good.
Well, I mean, in the most general terms, right, the earliest Christians were by and large not intellectualized.
Right.
We know that. The earliest Christians came from Palestine. You have some indications that there was members of Caesar's household from Paul's letters, right, who were adopting the Christian faith. You have some high society ladies, both Roman and Jewish, who converted to Christianity, so that by the end of the 1st century A.D., there may now be a little bit of an influx of intellectual, educated persons into the Christian communities. You have the Apostle Paul, who of all the early leaders in the Christian church was by far the most educated,
right? Except
for maybe Apollos, who was by legend an Alexandrian Jew, but we don't know anything about him really. He's one candidate for the composition of the book of Hebrews.
That's right. Yeah.
But when we get into the middle of the 2nd century, then we have some of the first Christian scholars. Now, I'm not in any way saying, you know me well enough, that this is some kind of a better development, right? I'm not giving a pro-intellectualized discussion of, what's necessary for the Christian faith, but just a description of what happened, right?
Okay.
So Justin Martyr comes along, and he writes in Greek to the Roman emperor, and he begins to develop apologetic arguments for the Christian faith in the face of challenges from Jews and pagans alike. Mm-hmm. And so for the next couple hundred years, you have this process continue to develop. So you have men like Arnobius of Sicca, and you have Irenaeus of Lyon, who was from Asia Minor and spoke Greek, and now he finds himself in southern France somewhere, leading a congregation there, writing in Greek against various heresies, the Marcionites, the Gnostics. And there are so many different sects that are active at the time that to a disinterested observer, Christianity would just seem like yet another sect.
Right.
You've got Mithras, you have Neoplatonists, you have the Gnostics, you've got Zoroastrianism. All these things are in the air, you might say.
Yeah.
But eventually, a tradition of intellectual Christianity developed. So Arnobius of Sicca, early to mid 3rd century, then Lactantius, you've got Tertullian from about 180 to 250, perhaps. Tertullian was an accomplished Roman orator and lawyer in his own right before he became a Christian.
A North African. Right?
That's correct.
Yep.
And in fact, one of his legal opinions appears in a preserved Roman code, right? One of his legal positions.
Is that right? I didn't know
this.
Yeah.
Yep. I think it's in the Pandects, as it's called. But then Tertullian, he uses his considerable Roman oratorical skill and his research and intellectual ability, and he begins to try to give Christianity a more thorough, intellectualized explanation.
And at this point, we're talking about something that's very decentralized, right?
Yes.
All these things are kind of happening concurrently, but they're not
in many different places,
but not in tandem with one another.
That's correct.
Okay, all right.
And you begin to see two separate tracts being developed. You start to see a Western tract, which is conducted primarily in Latin, although many people in the Roman West can still speak Greek well. And you start to see an Eastern tract, developed in Antioch and places even further east, where the knowledge of Latin is rare or non-existent. So eventually these linguistic differences lead to a split in the two churches, not just over language, over many things, but I think the seeds or the beginnings of that is in the 2nd and 3rd centuries.
Yeah,
right.
Interesting. Right.
And then you move along, and Tertullian has coined the term Trinitas to describe what he sees as the biblical phenomena of one God and three persons. So he coins the term Triunitas. And there are many, many different translations of the Bible into Latin. They may have begun as early as the 1st century. Now, critical scholars and skeptics would say that none of the scriptures that we count as the New Testament were written in the 1st century. I don't accept that view. We can talk about that on another occasion. A book by a guy named Wenham, revisiting the intertextuality of the Gospels. I'm pretty convinced that the Gospels are nearly as old as they appear to be, right?
Yeah. That
they were written by the apostles or their immediate successors.
Right.
But anyway, you have the potential for Latin translations of some aspects of the New Testament, even at the end of the 1st century AD, but surely by 160, 170, you have a number of different codices that show the Gospels in particular, and then the different letters that are circulating.
So when Boyle uses the term the Old Latin Bible, that's referring to these lost early Latin translations?
No, it's something before the Vulgate, which had come into common usage, and we have fragments of it still.
Okay.
So it is what the Vulgate replaced. But I'm saying that, it's possible there were Latin translations in use in Rome and other predominantly Latin-speaking cities at the beginning of the 2nd century.
Yeah.
There's no evidence, but I don't see any reason to disbelieve it.
Right.
But certainly by the end of the 2nd century, not only are the books of the New Testament circulating in Greek, but there are evidences of Latin translations.
Okay, all right.
And so by the 3rd century, mid to late 200s, you have established traditions of Latin translations of the Bible. This is what Jerome replaces in his translation into the Vulgate, which is near the end of the 4th century.
Gotcha.
The famous story, he goes off to Bethlehem, and he works on creating a translation of the Old and New Testaments from Hebrew and Greek, respectively. Interesting side note.
Yes.
When he talks about this with Augustine, in a letter, Augustine at first objects and says, don't translate the Old Testament from Hebrew, because the people are really used to the Septuagint translation of the Psalms and other parts of the Old Testament. They know their Latin version as translated from the Greek.
Okay.
Don't mess up the standard liturgy and practice of the church by translating it from Hebrew, because it's not going to be identical.
Oh, that's so interesting.
And this is one where I think, Augustine gets a mulligan. So if we compare Augustine and Jerome, my sympathies are, almost 100% with Augustine.
Yeah.
But here, I got to give Jerome the nod. He was right. Augustine whiffed on that.
Yeah.
And later Augustine recognized it.
Yeah.
And he said, after further reflection, you're right. I support your project of bringing the Bible into Latin from the Hebrew instead of from the Greek.
That's interesting. Yeah. And from what I understand is, as kind of the persona and personality of Jerome as it survives, is he was going to do it his way.
Absolutely.
No matter what anybody told him.
Yes.
Right?
Someday we should do an episode on the biography of Jerome by J.N.D. Kelly. It's just an excellent, his writings, or his life writings and controversies.
Yeah.
And as I'm reading through it, I'm thinking how much I dislike Jerome.
Uh-huh.
It's a brilliant biography. And I'm thinking how much I dislike this. And then I'm thinking, he sounds a lot like me. I'm not comparing myself to him in terms of education, but just irritability and temperament. Now I'm thinking, maybe that's why I dislike him so much. Has that ever happened to you?
You're
reading something that you have a reaction to, and then you realize, oh, this is like a mirror.
Yes. No, I just had that actually. I picked up a book out of the library. I won't say what kind of the theme was, but the premise sounded great online. I picked it up. I was reading it, and the author's style just really grated on me and irritated me. And then I was thinking about it. I said, this sounds like something I would write. It's just the word choice, the references. And I think that's why I don't like it.
Yes, that's so. I don't know. That's so. What's discomforting when that happens?
It is.
It's so disconcerting. I really dislike it. It's like hearing your own voice, right?
Yes.
If other people say your voice is okay, all right, fine. But then when you hear it, it's just grating.
Right. Gaffigan has a bit about, he says something like, "Do you ever see a picture of yourself and it ruins your day?" Right.
Absolutely. So that's what it was like for me to read the biography of Jerome.
Gotcha.
I learned a lot. I grew in my appreciation for him. He was right about this, and Augustine was just wrong about it. But boy, he doesn't come across as a lovable guy.
Yeah. All right. Well, that was excellent. That was exactly what I was looking for. And I think that sets the table very nicely. But should we dive into some linguistics here?
Yeah. So in addition to relying upon Boyle's article, Sermo Reopening the Conversation from 1977, I also tracked down this volume, and this is courtesy of the Calvin University Heckman Library, where I still have borrowing privileges. So this is her 1977 monograph. I think I'm going to buy this. I found a copy online. So you folks online who buy used books, when you hear this podcast, you stay away from this one, okay?
Back off.
This is mine, because there may be only a couple hardcover copies in circulation, and I got my eye on this one.
Our listeners, you never should have said a thing.
You're right. They're going to just...
Those vultures!
They're going to just pounce on it like a cat on a fat mouse.
Yeah.
So the title is Erasmus on Language and Method in Theology.
All right.
And I've been reading a lot of Erasmus.
You're a fan.
Well, I'm a fan of his brilliance and accomplishments.
Yeah.
But again, it's like Jerome.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I think Augustine would be a little cuddly. I think Augustine would be a little fuzzy, right?
Yeah.
Augustine's a guy I could have a beer with.
Definitely.
Jerome and Erasmus.
Not so much?
No, I don't think they'd give me the time of day.
Yeah, okay.
Anyway.
All right.
So this is page 3 of this 1977 monograph published by the University of Toronto. And this is how Boyle starts. She says, "In the beginning there was speech. In that very beginning when God created the world, and everything God made, he made by speaking. Then, in February 1516, an undistinguished theologian, Erasmus of Rotterdam, published a Greek and Latin edition of God's New Testament. Exhausted by a life's labor compressed into months, he awaited the scholarly consensus of theologians. Already heartened by the approval of Leo X, Pope and patron of the humanities, Erasmus' delight increased as congratulatory letters augured the way to immortality. By August, he could boast to Johann Reuchlin, quote, 'The New Testament has earned me many friends everywhere. Not friends only. Some academic theologians were rankled by his boldness. He had, after all, never completed the course of theological studies at Paris, and his only record of lectures was not a brilliant examination, but a jocular note to an equally bored student. Controversy flared into invective, and Erasmus was soon penning defenses of his text, of his method, of his exegesis, and of his character."
Wow. I had no idea that Erasmus kind of came out of nowhere.
Yes.
Wow, that's
Well,
amazing.
you know, he was, by legend, he was the illegitimate son of a priest.
I didn't know this. I don't know much about Erasmus at all. That's okay. All right.
The most amazing thing about his life is just his brilliance,
Yeah.
right? James J. O'Donnell, you probably recognize that name.
Augustine scholar.
Correct, University of Pennsylvania. He once made the claim that Erasmus was the cleverest man ever to write Latin. And I've thought about that a lot since then, and I think I would give it to Ovid. The problem is we have no Ovidian prose.
Right.
All we have is poetry, but it's so hard to beat Ovid. Come on.
Yeah, that would be an interesting throwdown.
Exactly.
Yeah. Cage match. Erasmus
That's right, Erasmus versus Ovid.
Yeah.
So then we skip ahead here to page 6, because this will set the stage. The charges which the inflamed scholastics leveled against Erasmus were 2. The first, exemplified by the sermon of an English bishop, Henry Standish, raving in the churchyard of St. Paul's, London, was that Erasmus had altered the traditional ecclesiastical reading, quote, "For when, up until now, for more than 1,000 years, the whole church has read, in principio erat verbum, now at last, if it pleases the gods on high, a little Greek somebody will teach us that we ought to read, in principio erat Sermo." The second charge, reported from the sermon of a Carmelite preacher in the church of St. Gudula, Brussels, was that Erasmus, quote, "has not feared to correct the gospel of St. John, therefore condemning what the evangelist himself wrote."
Ooh.
End quote. Similar trouble stirred in Paris, as Erasmus learned from the letters of friends. Now, there's a lot to unpack there.
Yeah. Now, I correct me if I'm wrong, though. In the Boyle article we read, she states that it seems from the earliest Latin translations, Sermo was the originally preferred term.
Absolutely.
And it switches to verbum.
That's right.
And then Erasmus gets in hot water for bringing Sermo back.
That's correct.
Okay.
Yes, that's exactly it.
Okay.
And so, we're going to examine the article in some detail. But in this paragraph that I just read from the monograph, page 6, we see this fellow Henry Standish complaining about the upsetting of tradition, right? Which is one kind of criticism. I'm a fairly traditional person in many, many ways. So I would say, if it's not broke, don't fix it.
Right.
Kind of.
It's kind of like Augustine saying to Jerome, don't go to the Hebrew. Right.
Correct.
Yeah. Stick with what we know.
Everybody knows the Psalms from the Septuagint. That's what they've been singing. Now you're going to, you're going to redo it, and the cover's not going to be as good.
Right.
But the second charge from this Carmelite preacher of the Church of St. Gudula, Brussels, is different. It's a theological criticism that Erasmus, quote, "has not feared to correct the gospel of St. John." And this gets at something deeper, which was later to have a lot of implications for Catholic-Protestant relations. Because humanists in the 16th century came from all the traditions, right? Mm-hmm. So there were Lutheran humanists of fine distinction, Melanchthon. There were Swiss and German Reformed humanists. There were Roman Catholic humanists. There were Anabaptist humanists. They all read the 3 languages, Greek, Hebrew, and Latin. Mm-hmm. It was a shared inheritance. But on what basis should the arguments be conducted? This was one of the contended points for sure.
Yeah.
And so that at the Council of Trent, which concluded its work in 1563, I believe, they came down very hard on appealing to the Greek and Hebrew manuscripts for deciding theological matters, and they endorsed Jerome's Vulgate.
Ah, okay.
This is the basis.
Yeah.
It's in the canons of the Council of Trent. This is the basis for deciding theological controversy.
That's really
You
interesting.
can and ought to read the Greek and Hebrew manuscripts. And again, guys like Bellarmine, a famous Jesuit, these were fantastic scholars. I'm not denigrating, I'm not a Roman Catholic, but I'm not in any way denigrating their learning. It was more a matter of what's going to be the basis for our decisions.
Right.
So if you swap out sermo for verbum, I'm trying to use the ecclesiastical, so it's, verbum.
There you go.
It's hard for me, but
I know.
If you swap it out after 1,000 years, are you in fact threatening the church's theology?
Yeah. It reminds me of, I've, on a handful of occasions, I've run into Christians who treat the King James translation in a similar kind of way. It's such a it's become kind of the ancient foundation,
correct?
Right? And so that becomes the thing you don't mess with.
Sure. What translation were you raised on?
NIV.
Okay.
Yeah. How about you?
King James.
Were you really?
Yeah, for the first 12 years of my life.
Is that
maybe?
right?
And so I don't know it as well as many people do, but the Lord is my shepherd; I shall not want. He maketh me lie down.
Yeah.
It has beauty to it.
Sure.
And in terms of accuracy, I'll vouch for it, for 3/4 of the day, not all day long. I think it has weaknesses because any translation is going to be an imperfect representation of the original.
Of course.
And in fact, the Reformed confessions that I subscribe, they make it very clear. It's the original autographs in their languages that are authoritative.
Right.
Things that come after, they have problems.
Yes.
And the same is true of Jerome. And Erasmus, had the temerity and the audacity, the chutzpah.
Right.
Chutzpah must be what, like a Polish word or something?
I don't know. Yeah.
I just threw that in there.
But, so Jerome had become the stand in a way that by the time we get to the Renaissance, Aristotle was kind of was the major authority that had to be then kind of taken down a few notches.
That's correct.
If Aristotle said it, it's from Olympus.
That's right. Ipse dixit, right?
Yeah.
He himself, Pythagoras said it, so it's got to be true.
Right.
Cicero has that great anecdote. It's probably in the Tusculan Disputations, I don't remember, where Cicero is criticizing the students of Pythagoras, and the students of Pythagoras, they don't bother to make arguments. They make an argumentum ad auctoritatem, just a simple appeal to authority.
Right.
Ipse dixit, that settles it. So Erasmus had the temerity, the audacity to say, I don't think verbum is right. I'm going to revive sermo.
And maybe certainly in his day and age, maybe in any age, sometimes it takes someone who's an outsider to have the nerve to do that, right?
You think Erasmus wore a leather jacket and had long hair?
I'm picturing him as...
He's riding a motorcycle.
He's kind of like a Fonzie.
Like a James Dean.
James Dean.
Fonzie. Yeah, Fonzie's like the poor man's James Dean.
Yeah, exactly. I think James Dean is probably the better corollary here.
Yeah.
Right.
Just like, Gerald McRaney.
Yes, yeah.
Simon and Simon.
Of course, yes.
Great theme song.
Yeah. Agreed.
He's kind of like the poor man's Tom Selleck.
That's right on.
Who is the poor man's Burt Reynolds, right?
That's right, exactly. We can keep going back.
How far back are we going to go?
Yeah, who's the platonic form? Burt Reynolds, you're getting close, I think. Yeah, right. I don't Brando.
Mustache.
Yeah.
Did Brando have a mustache?
No, he never did, but he kind of like the tough guy.
Yeah.
Alpha male. Steve McQueen, maybe. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. But,
so that's kind of the figure that Erasmus cut in the early 16th century.
Interesting.
1516, his novum instrumentum, the new tool, right? The new tool, the new guide to reading the New Testament. And he said, here's my Greek text, and here's what I'm going to do for John 1:1. In the beginning was the Sermo.
Man.
Okay, so Jeff, we don't really have time to dwell on the monograph, and there's another problem.
Yes.
I haven't read all of it yet.
Oh, that is a problem, yeah.
So again, listener, if you like this book, just stay away, okay?
Just hold off.
Hold off. Maybe that's what I should say. Hold off. Am I being too aggressive?
No, it's all right.
Okay.
You got to lay down the law.
I feel a little punchy. But we do have time to deal with the article, right?
Oh, yep.
Because the article is very manageable, and those who have access to JSTOR, they can find it for themselves. But could you read the first paragraph? Because
Sure.
I think it's a pretty nice summary of where we're headed next.
Yes. In the beginning was the conversation, not the word. From Tertullian to Beza extends a tradition of translating logos in John 1:1 as Sermo, a tradition now forgotten even by curators of antique words. Only when Erasmus restored the variant in his second edition of the New Testament, 1519, and defended it with a battery of philological and patristic arguments did the translation incite public debate. With the Tridentine sanction of the Vulgate's verbum, however, the impetus for the tradition of Sermo ceased. And although fortified by Calvin's commentary on John, Beza translated logos as Sermo in his New Testament editions. The proliferation of vernacular Bibles among Protestants soon submerged the philological and theological issue.
Yeah. Thank you. That is very succinct on the part of our friend Boyle.
Yeah.
Specifically, this sentence, with a Tridentine sanction of the Vulgate's verbum. So that's what I was trying somewhat clumsily to summarize earlier, that after the Council of Trent, which I think met from 1547 to 1563, they said, this is the authoritative version. This work of Jerome, the Vulgate, this is now the court of appeal for theological arguments. Now, verbum is enshrined, Sermo is off the table, but Beza had 5 different editions, and we'll have to talk a little bit about him, of his major annotations on the New Testament. And in the very first one, he says, Erasmus, we'll read a little bit after the ads, Erasmus correctly changed this from verbum to sermo. And from there on out, pretty much all English translations of the Bible are inspired by Beza's reading.
Okay, all right. And speaking of Beza's readings,
yes,
I believe it's time for the ads.
Okay.
This episode of Ad Nauseam is brought to you by the good people at Ratio Coffee. Ratio Coffee, found at ratiocoffee.com, is a place where you can go to find everything that you need to have delicious gourmet brewed coffee right in your home. Dave, this morning, as I always do this morning, I had my water ready to go. I had my metal cone ready to go.
Right.
And I brewed up just a perfect pot of coffee in my Ratio 8.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Same for me. I love my morning ritual, right? I get up, I get the eggs started, I get the bacon started, I put some fat in the pan. That's got to be a song.
You put some fat in the pan?
Put some fat in the pan?
Yeah.
Blues, jazz, something like that.
Sure.
And while that's going, then I start in on the ratio. And it's so nice because you get things set up, and then, my eggs and bacon are finished, and the ratio is just humming along with precision, technology, beautiful aesthetics. It's quite a machine. I have the 8. You've got the 8?
I've got the 8. I for a while, I had the 6, kind of the younger brother of the 8, which is also an excellent machine.
And yours is in stainless steel?
Stainless steel, yeah.
Okay.
I got the hulking flagon.
That's right.
That keeps that thing warm for hours with no need for any kind of hypocaust system.
That's right.
Yeah.
Do you like the rubber bung that you stick in the top of that thing? It's a perfect fit.
It is a perfect fit. Yeah.
You rotate it 90 degrees, you're going to get no slop while you're carrying the hulking flagon around your domicile.
Yeah, everything about the machine is it's so wonderfully designed.
Right.
I mean, it looks so simple. It reminds me of the Parthenon. It looks so simple, but if you consider the details, there's nothing simple about it. Right?
And without all the extensive scaffolding of the last 30 years.
Yeah, no scaffolding, right? None needed. Yeah.
So that's your morning ritual.
It is.
And Mrs. Winkle is a big coffee fan as well.
Yep.
She likes it?
She does. She loves it. I brew it up, and the ritual, I will bring her a cup once it's ready, and it's a great way to start the day.
Yeah, well, let's mention the coupon code now, and then maybe we can say a few other things. So the coupon code for February is AN, that's ad nauseum, CO coffee, ANCO3, and then Q.
Yes.
And what's the Q stand for?
It's got to be for quality.
That's exactly what I was thinking.
Right.
The Q is for quality.
You're right. I was going to say chaotic, but that doesn't work.
Right.
It's quality.
I don't imagine imagine Don was drinking coffee while he was tilting at windmills.
No. Right.
ANCO3Q. And what does that get them?
So if you go to ratiocoffee.com and you pick the object of your choice,
the 8, which is the flagship.
It's the flagship.
It's the Millennium Falcon. It's going to set you back a little bit.
Yep.
But why would you want to buy an inferior product?
Of course, right. Or the 6, right, which is a little bit less costly.
Yeah,
but
attainable.
Attainable, a wonderful machine. And we should mention that on the way is coming the 4.
Very soon.
Yeah,
the Ratio 4. And so this is a little bit here from, well, we should tell them, what do they get?
Right. So if you type in that coupon code ANCO3Q, that will get you 15% off your entire order.
That's correct.
Yeah.
And the 4 is coming along. So this is from the ratiocoffee.com website. I like this title. As easy as pods, but so much better. So they're talking about the Keurig. And they say, ever wonder what the convenience of a Keurig really costs? I know, Jeff, you've been lying awake at night, tossing and turning.
Oh,
Keurig cost.
Exactly.
Pods.
That's right. I'm talking in my sleep, driving my wife crazy.
Right.
Yeah.
You wake up in the morning and someone's taken a Sharpie and scratched it on the wall.
Yes.
With a little equation, Keurig equals question mark.
Exactly.
I know. Ratio says we did too. On average, $33 to $50 a pound, depending on the roaster. Can you imagine?
That's crazy.
I had no idea that a Keurig cost that much. For mediocre coffee, brewed with haste and waste at the forefront into throwaway plastic pods. There's a lot of truth there. Ratio says we offer a better way. Buy fresh from your local roaster and have the 4 brew up a cup. The taste will be monumentally better.
Yep, I can vouch for that.
Because the 4, I mean, I haven't had it in my kitchen yet. I've seen a lot of the promotional material. Has all the same great technology and features as the 6 and the 8, but it makes a half pot, and it's going to be more within reach, you might say, of your average coffee consumer.
Yeah, I'm excited for that to come out and to plug it right here in this space.
Absolutely.
Check it out.
This episode of Ad Nauseam is also brought to you by Hackett Publishing, Hackett, hackettpublishing.com, for nigh unto 53 years now, bringing high-quality translations and original work to a broad audience of those interested in classics. Jeff, what do you think about Hackett, and just how grateful are you for their support of this podcast?
Very grateful. As we've often said, these guys have been with us from almost the very beginning. We're coming up on almost
going on 4 years, 4 years, believe it or not.
Right, and they've stuck with us. They are one of these wonderful companies that is keeping the flame alive, putting out there the classics, not in these hardcover, $325 volumes, but these are attractive, high quality paperbacks that are not going to kill your wallet. There's so much to choose from. I love that they have multiple translations of the same works.
Ovid's Metamorphoses is my favorite example. The Lombardo one, which is brilliant, and then the Ambrose translation as well, so you can see the same poem, the same work from different refracted angles.
Yes, my myth students right now are right in the middle of Stanley Lombardo's translation of the Odyssey.
Oh yeah,
and
so is that the one with the moonshot?
The moonshot on the front,
okay.
And it's great. A lot of students come into this stuff intimidated, thinking I'm not going to get this. This is weird, foreign stuff, and Lombardo's translation is so readable.
Fresh
and so approachable and fresh, yeah, and that they walk away with a lot of confidence about what they're learning. It's
incredible.
Great. It's great.
Incredible.
Yep.
So, what would you say about Hackett's catalog? Is it small, medium, large?
It's wide ranging. Of course, we focus on the classics here, but they have stuff. They have Islamic studies. They have Eastern philosophy,
South American studies.
Yes, it's all over the place. So, listener, do yourself a favor. Go to hackettpublishing.com. Check out their wide array of offerings. Find the books that you want, put them in the grocery basket. And Dave, what's the coupon code there?
The coupon code is AN2024.
Right.
Ad Nauseam 2024.
Yes.
And I've got some anecdotal evidence recently that our listeners are in fact patronizing Hackett for what they need.
Fantastic.
So grateful for that. Thank you so much, listeners, for supporting our efforts. We have things to pay for here around the studio, costs of delivering this content, and so your support of Hackett is really appreciated.
It's great. So use that coupon code that will get you 20% off your entire order and free shipping. You can't get that at Danube.com or Nile.com.
Are you talking about the river-based book emporium retailers?
I think I am, yes.
Rubber, the RBBER?
Yeah, oh yeah, exactly. That's a formidable consortium, but
yes.
Hackett is up to the task.
Hackett is very dry and arid by comparison.
That's right.
There's no deluge, no diluvian nonsense.
Indeed.
Check it out. Okay, Jeff, as we get back into it now, in the Boyle article, she condenses this, distills it. You like that?
I do.
Nicely for us. She makes a number of claims as she deals with Erasmus's groundbreaking decision to revive Sermo. The first one is this, quote, Sermo is the most ancient extant Latin translation for logos in the Johannine prologue. It conserves faith's witness to Christ, the eloquent discourse of God, a witness historically diminished by the truth which the translation verbum served. And for contemporary philosophies and scientific linguistics which recognize meaning in the sentence, not the word, it may make better sense than a theology of the word.
Okay.
So you follow that? What's she saying here?
She kind of lost me at the end there.
Okay.
But can you unpack that?
Yeah, I think I can. I think that what she is saying is that most modern-day philologists and linguistics are skeptical of the notion that an individual word can carry meaning.
Okay.
Right. So it's not as though the word bull, for example. We have here in the studio, I'm looking at it right now, we have a little bull made out of obsidian.
Yes.
It was gotten in Mexico. I threw out the word bull to you without any context, without any surrounding words. It has too many denotations to have any fixed connotation.
Right.
And I think this is Boyle's claim. This is the regnant understanding of how words work.
This is Chomsky linguistics.
Exactly.
Yes, yeah.
And it's not a Platonic notion that words have an enduring meaning.
Right.
Now, at this point, many people get a little bit uncomfortable because, especially more conservative folk like myself, they think this is an argument for a kind of moral relativism or subjectivism, that a word can mean anything you want it to.
Right.
But that isn't really the claim. It's just that meaning is established by how people actually use it.
Yes.
And a word like verbum, she would say, it doesn't have a specific fixed meaning on its own. And neither does sermo, but sermo has the right denotations to secure the connotation.
Right, right. Well, it gets really complicated in that... when I was at the beginning of the episode, I was talking about how I'm always been uncomfortable with the English translation of a word.
Yes, for and
I think
logos.
that because when I hear the word, I tend to kind of define it as something fairly simple.
Correct.
It's something denoted by alphabetic characteristics. Right?
Exactly.
But that's different than saying that's what verbum has always meant.
Correct.
Right. So did verbum at some point also have kind of this range of meaning or meanings that perhaps our word today does not?
No, verbum has a narrower range of meanings than either word or sermo.
And Boyle is saying that sermo, because of its wider ranging, is perhaps the better choice.
Yes, not just its wider range, but it includes one important denotation, which is the idea of speech. Whereas,
yes, right.
And so we're going to have to get into the nittius grittius, as you said, before long. But whereas verbum means a discrete phoneme, right?
Yes.
Like a sound.
Yeah.
Sermo is best represented, she says, by oratio. And this was Erasmus's argument. The Latin, hologos, excuse me.
Yes.
The Greek hologos is best represented by the Latin word oratio, which means conversation or a speech as delivered.
Yes.
However, Erasmus said oratio is a third declension feminine noun, and because it's a feminine noun, the gender isn't exactly right to match hologos, both because hologos is masculine and because the theology of John 1:1, here Augustine and others, identifies hologos as the second person of the Trinity.
Yeah, right.
God the Son.
Yes.
Which it would be, according to Erasmus and others, and I agree with them, not appropriate to represent with a feminine noun.
Right.
Even though the idea is totally unobjectionable and probably better.
And something you completely miss once you're using a language like English.
Correct, which is non-gendered.
Right. right. Oh, that's really, really interesting. Okay.
So the first part there at the bottom of the page, the part about Tertullian and Cyprian, here's the historical argument that Erasmus advances. Jeff, can you take that part, please?
Sure. Tertullian and Cyprian quote Sermo in every citation of the opening verses of the Johannine prologue. In addition to 8 quotations, there is Tertullian's valuable impartial testimony in Adversus Praxian that the custom of Latin Christians was to read in principio erat Sermo. Although he preferred ratio to Sermo, he's making it even more complicated.
Yeah, so there is another candidate. How shall we take halogos? Well, Sermo, ratio, and verbum are 3 candidates. Now, I think somewhere between ratio, which is feminine, and Sermo is really what halogos represents.
You saying between ratio and Sermo? Is that what you said? Okay. Yeah.
Well, because the idea is animals don't have hoi logoi. I'm going to voice the unpopular position that animals are irrational.
Okay.
I know that's probably enough to end the podcast right there.
Well, you grew up on a farm, right? So
yeah.
You know what you're talking about.
Well, none of the cows were out there doing trigonometry and studying Cicero.
Right.
So I love them,
right.
But I don't think that, anyway.
What I've learned from Chick-fil-A billboards is that cows are just really bad spellers.
Yeah, and they can barely paint.
Right.
How is it a compliment to cows? That's funny, Jeff.
I know.
How is it a compliment to cows to portray them as bad spellers?
I know, exactly. Right.
I don't think so. Anyway.
Okay.
So where was I? Yeah,
animals don't
have hoi logoi,
yeah.
Right? Because that requires intelligence and rationality. So the ratio leads to the Sermo, and the Sermo is evidence of the ratio.
Okay.
Cicero has this great false etymology about the relationship between ratio and oratio.
Okay.
It's a false etymology. In other words, those 2 Latin words don't share a common ancestor.
Right.
But he would say that, ratio is reasoning. The oratio is how the reasoning is expressed by your os, by your mouth.
Oh, okay.
Which, again, listener, this is false. It's not a correct etymology, but it's memorable.
It's useful.
It's very useful.
Yes.
Yeah. So we got those 3 candidates. Then what about Cyprian there?
He says Cyprian twice quotes John 1:1 in Adversus Judaeos ad Quirinum as in principio fuit Sermo. Et Sermo erat apud Deum, et Deus erat Sermo. He also interprets Sermo as Christ in 3 psalm verses and a passage from the book of Revelation. Cyprian is acknowledged a superior source of the Old Latin Bible because of his antiquity and because he repeats almost 1/9 of the New Testament. But if the modern theory of dual North African and European sources for the Old Latin Bible is correct, then Sermo in Tertullian and Cyprian may only demonstrate the former tradition. No European patristic writings in Latin contemporaneous with Tertullian survive for comparison. Sermo remains, then, the earliest extant Latin translation of logos in John 1:1, and on Tertullian's word, the reading commonly circulated.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's a silver bullet, isn't it?
Yeah, I would say so.
That's a silver bullet that Erasmus was correct that Sermo is the most ancient reading.
Yeah.
And therefore is the most ancient commonly accepted translation of halogos. Therefore, he's on solid ground in reintroducing it.
Isn't that just another form of the argument to authority, though? Just because it's the oldest, it's the best?
Well, it's legitimate because it's oldest.
Okay.
Are you saying that the ancients don't hold full authority with you?
No, I'm not. Well, no.
Okay.
All right. But I mean, it's also, I think that.
Do you want me to question your conservative bona fides?
I think that Erasmus. I don't think Erasmus would disagree with me in saying that he's not simply saying, well, Sermo's right because Tertullian said it's right.
No, he's not saying that.
He's saying that this is worth looking at the Greek again and considering the full range of these meanings.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
So let's skip ahead right to the very last page of the article just for a moment.
Yeah.
In his acclaimed analysis of the doctrine of the word, this is the final paragraph, says Boyle, in his acclaimed analysis of the doctrine of the word, Bernard Lonergan, a famous theologian of the 20th century, assumes that verbum was the traditional translation for logos in the Latin church before Augustine. That is not so, as the reader has seen. So here's why the appeal to authority is important, because those who support verbum, they even said to Erasmus, as we saw, you're changing the tradition, which is to be unquestioned.
Right.
For 1,000 years, you're in fact correcting St. John,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Because, St. John, of course, did not speak Latin.
Right.
He chose logos. But if verbum has some kind of unquestioned superiority, then, we can't change it.
Right.
And I guess after we move along from Cyprian, we have a couple of other church fathers to mention. This would be Novation in his tract on the Trinity. He uses verbum. And according to Boyle, this is the first occurrence of verbum as a translation for logos.
Mm-hmm.
But Novation also uses Sermo. After Novation, she says, this ambivalence about Sermo and verbum disappears until Augustine revives it. Hilary of Poitiers, he died in 367, cites 9 times the opening verses of the Johannine prologue, and in every instance, logos is translated as verbum. So now verbum's starting to gain some precedence.
Yeah.
By the 4th century, verbum is universally preferred in the West. Eusebius Vercellensis' treatise on the Trinity quotes verbum in every citation of the prologue. His evidence is important not only because he may have transmitted the oldest European version of the Gospels, preserved in the Codex Vercellensis, but because he prefixes his citations of the verse with the explicit phrase, as it is written. So now we see verbum starting to gain the upper hand.
Okay.
Right. And what about on 163, Jeff? What do we learn about verbum versus sermo from Lactantius?
Sure. Again, Boyle. Meanwhile, how did the churches in Africa read the verse? Lactantius quotes verbum as the translation for logos in John 1:1, but in the context of his demonstration that logos means sermo or ratio. Arnobius does not record the verse, while Marius Victorinus preserves the Greek logos throughout his Latin hymns on the Trinity.
Yeah, so the third individual there, that's the punting, right? Let's just take the word logos, lambda, omicron, gamma, omicron, sigma.
Just keep it.
Transliterate it and represent it with Roman letters, right? Logos.
Yeah.
And then you solve the problem in one sense. But there's a limit, right? There's a limit for how much you can do that.
Yeah.
In the Gospel of John, there are a number of important theological ideas that are, rich and difficult. How many of them are you going to leave untranslated?
Right. Well, you could do that, but you need a footnote, right?
Yes.
To unpack that, right?
And the footnote says this means either sermo or verbum or maybe ratio or maybe oratio. It's difficult.
Right. So you think Victorinus there is it's a punt. He's taking the lazy way out.
But he's also writing hymns.
Oh yeah.
And so here's a different genre.
Of course.
Right. Have you ever had this? You read something in a song or in a hymn and you think, that's a little suspect.
Yes.
The logic, the theology, the history. But I don't want to say they get a pass, but there is a different standard.
Right. I often find it's because, they did that because they needed that rhyme.
Oh, yes.
Right? They say the rhyme is more important than the historicity.
Correct number of syllables.
Right.
Well, I was an undergraduate at that institution where we both matriculated.
Yes.
Someone came up to me and we were in discussion about church music and they criticized the, I think it's a revivalist hymn. He lives, Christ Jesus lives today.
Yeah.
He walks with me, he talks with me. You know that one?
Of course.
Yeah. The end is, you ask me now how I know he lives within my heart.
Yes.
That's the conclusion.
Yeah.
And this person had some good, cogent, trenchant criticisms of the conclusion, right, as theologically defective. Well, I agree. That's not good epistemology. I know he lives because I have a feeling in my heart.
Yeah.
But I tried to counter-argue, and I'm no fan of that hymn. I think it's frankly pretty weak.
It's never been my favorite.
No, I find it cutesy and sing-songy.
Yeah.
But it's not a theological treatise.
Right.
It isn't, you can't expect it to do more than it was designed to do.
Exactly.
Yeah. That's just kind of a sidebar.
Right.
But Marius Victorinus, let's just keep logos as logos, but presented in Roman letters.
Yeah, it probably sang better.
Problem solved. Yeah. So Jeff, as the article continues, what does Boyle say about, some speculation as to Jerome's choice?
Sure. Boyle writes, perhaps Jerome was ignorant of sermo as a traditional translation for logos in John 1:1. Without leaving an explanation, he chose verbum, a decision which astonished Erasmus.
Yeah. So what do you think? Is it is it reasonable to think that Jerome just didn't know?
Well,
what Tertullian and Novation and Hilary, which was who was a younger contemporary?
It would seem unlikely.
It does seem unlikely.
Yeah. We'd see Jerome, his dates 4th century.
Yes, 4th into early 5th.
All right. So I think that
he was alive as late as 410 when Rome was sacked. I don't know his exact date of death.
Yeah, I would find it very surprising if he didn't know this. Shall I continue with Boyle?
Yes, please.
Although the fathers sometimes use the words interchangeably, sermo and verbum are not synonymous. They may even be regarded as antonyms. Verbum may be argued a grammatically inaccurate, at least inappropriate, translation for logos in John 1:1. Among its denotations, logos means speech, a continuous statement, narrative, oration, a verbal expression or utterance, a particular utterance, or saying, expression, utterance, speech regarded formally. Both the New Testament and Greek patristic literature employ these meanings. Even in the classical lexicon, where other meanings were more significant, logos signified a phrase, complex term, sentence, or complete statement in opposition to a discrete word, verbum. It was a continuous statement such as a fable, legend, story, or speech delivered in a court of assembly. Rarely meaning a single word, logos could never signify grammatically a vocable, and then she gives a number of Greek words, epos, lexis, onoma, chrema.
Yeah. So those are the 4 words, epos, lexis, onoma, chrema, which can signify a grammatically discrete idea, a vocable, right? A vocable. And that is closer to verbum. But logos never means that.
Yes.
Is her claim. And so in that sense, logos and verbum would be antonyms.
Yes. Okay, right.
A logos is the act of speech or the idea, the organizing principle and thinking behind human communication. Verbum is that little packet of data which can't have, according to Chomskyan understanding, which by and large I think is accurate, can't have a fixed meaning on its own.
Right. That answers the question I had earlier, whether verbum at some point had a kind of a broader range of meaning than our word seems to suggest.
Right.
And so here Boyle is saying, no, verbum has always been something much, much narrower than something like sermo.
Yes.
Okay.
There is a hint somewhere, either in the article or the monograph, I can't remember which, that before classical times, so say before Caesar and Cicero, verbum was a little broader.
Okay.
But by the time that Jerome encountered the word, it had a fixed meaning in classical authors.
Okay.
On whom he would have relied. Now, we've been using the terms connotation and denotation quite a bit in this episode, and I think it's time for a definition.
Let's do it.
All right, so this is from Merriam-Webster. A word's denotation is its plain and direct meaning or meanings. It's what the word explicitly means, that is, what is fully and clearly expressed by a word. Now, this definition here, I'm editorializing, would not square with a Chomskyan understanding.
Right.
But the definition goes on. A word's connotation is what the word implies or suggests, that is, the nuances and shades of meaning that the word brings along with it, apart from what it explicitly names or describes. You want to continue?
Sure. Take the noun aroma. The denotation of aroma in the aroma of coffee is basically smell, the characteristic of something you perceive with your nose, but the connotation of aroma is typically a pleasant and pervasive smell. People generally apply the word aroma to coffee only if they like the smell.
That's correct.
Okay, yeah.
Here's an example.
Yeah.
Yesterday, I was announcing our church potluck, which followed the service, and I said, you can probably smell those odors coming out of the kitchen. And your response was exactly the response of everyone else.
Yes, exactly right.
They laughed.
Right.
Why?
Because odor implies something
bad.
nasty.
Correct.
Right.
And I said, oh, I'm sorry. I should have said, you can smell the aromas coming out of the kitchen. And then we all knew, oh, it's something good.
Yes.
So aroma and odor, the denotation, basically identical.
Right.
It's something that you perceive through your nose.
With your nose, yep.
But the connotations, very, very different.
Yes.
Yeah. So we did that with the naming of this podcast, right?
Right.
Your idea was ad nauseum, right?
Mm-hmm.
The denotation of ad nauseum is vomiting.
Yes.
Right? But the connotation is supposed to be something else. We're trying to redefine and re-engineer the connotation.
Exactly. Right. Yes. Good. Okay.
So how does this relate then to a sermo versus verbum?
So Sermo and verbum, it seems, have a very similar denotation.
Right.
But in terms of their connotation, they are something vastly different.
Okay.
Yeah.
And in fact, could even be antonyms.
Yes.
Boyle says.
Yes.
Which means that as a representation of logos, this is Erasmus's argument, verbum is off the table.
Right.
And in fact, what we have to have instead is sermo.
Exactly. Yes. And I think I have to agree.
Mm-hmm.
Right. It doesn't solve the problem of the English translation, though, right? We don't have the choice.
No.
Between a verbum or we have a verbum, but
right.
what's the English? All the translations of sermo.
Sermon. Nah.
In the beginning was the sermon?
No, that's
because it's usually
right.
later in the service.
Badum-ching. Yeah. Well, a number of different English translators have tried to get around this, but it's clumsy.
Yeah.
And in fact, this is why there are preachers to explain things that are hard to grasp in a single word or in a moment.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. So let's fast forward a little bit.
Okay.
This is page 165 of the article. We'll get into a little bit of Anselm of Canterbury and so forth. Although from Jerome's redaction until Erasmus's, the translation of logos in John 1:1 came to be transmitted as verbum. So in other words, whether Jerome knew about Cyprian and Tertullian and so forth, whether or not he knew, he opted for verbum and not sermo, which was the older. From that time until 1519, verbum was dominant. Nobody said sermo. Anselm of Canterbury, Remigius, Hugh of St. Cher, Nicholas of Lyra, Thomas Aquinas, and the Glossa Ordinaria all interpret biblical occurrences of sermo as Christ. So here's the theological issue, right? Exegeting Hebrews 4:12, for example, Thomas Aquinas refers sermo to the Son of God. Considered in itself, he writes, that word, sermo, seems to present a difficulty, but if we consider another translation, the meaning is plainer. For here we have sermo, in Greek it is logos, which is the same as verbum, whence sermo, i.e. verbum. So what Aquinas is saying is that the word sermo has that broad connotation of speech, conversation, discourse, etc. And because logos refers to the second person of the Trinity, Christ Jesus incarnate, which is a unified idea, there was a theological discomfort with representing him by this word sermo, which had a broader connotation.
Okay.
It seemed to pose a threat to the unity of the divine and human natures in the second person of the Trinity.
So the word verbum better expresses kind of the oneness of God.
Yes, precisely because it is so narrow in its denotation.
Gotcha. Okay. All right.
Which is a sophisticated point, but I mean, you can see it, right?
Yeah.
We can grasp the problem. I like what she says at the bottom of 165 as the argument develops further. Could you read that portion?
Sure. Did the translation of verbum for logos in John 1:1 originate in lexical chance or in a theological apology? This is impossible to establish on the evidence, difficult to assess. But there appears to be in Latin patristic thought, and this is speculation on a rationale for verbum, a fusion or confusion of the doctrine of Christ as revelation, logos, and as the only begotten, monogenes, so that one Son has been conceptualized as one word.
Right. So I'm not sure that I agree with everything she says, but I think that she's presenting the problem, right? Mm-hmm. In Latin patristic thought, she says it's speculation for verbum. The doctrine of Christ as revelation, logos, in the beginning was the logos, and then he's also the only begotten Son, monogenes. So then the word verbum was chosen because it can better represent both meanings, I think is what she's suggesting.
Okay. Yeah.
They thought, well, let's just use verbum because sermo doesn't really capture the second meaning, but it gets the first, and so it doesn't lead us into any problems. I believe that's what she's saying.
Okay.
A little bit further down, she develops this further. She says, concerned to distinguish God's persons against the modalistic claims of Sibelius and others, Augustine's argument lapsed into a problematic computation which he inherited from his adversaries. Whereas he might have argued that this one Son is one oration, one speech, he understood the Son as the Word, the Father's single undivided utterance. Would oratio or sermo have compromised the only begotten Son any more than the unity of a discourse is compromised by its composition from many words. A brilliant rhetor, Augustine did not develop a theology of the Son as copious discourse, logos, the Father's full and eloquent oration. Despite his modesty about his speculation on the Trinity, his partial perspective on the mystery of the logos was wholly adopted. So I think we could say verbum was the safe choice because it left unresolved some of the problems of exactly what is John saying about the relationship between the eternal Word and Christ incarnate as the Father's communication with humankind.
Yeah, that's very nuanced. In a way that, I mean, just when I was just thinking about this, just generically, it just seemed like compared to Sermo, verbum was seemed kind of like a lazy, too simple of a choice.
Correct.
But this you can really see the grappling of how to best express this really complex idea.
Correct.
Yeah.
I still think that Erasmus made the right choice, but I'm influenced by my fondness for Beza, who took up Erasmus's suggestion. So maybe as we start to wrap up, we can just look for a moment at what Beza did with this, then we'll call it a day.
Sounds good. All right, Dave. So what does Beza have to say about this this business?
I'd love to tell you. So this is from his Annotationes Maiores in Novum Testamentum, the 1589 edition, and it's from page 331. So if I could read a little bit of Latin first, and then I'll translate it. He says, Sermo ille, hologos, vulgata verbum, id est tohrema, quod recte mutavit Erasmus, veterum etium fretus actuaritate, puta Cypriani, lactantii, Hilarii, Hieronymi, Ambrosii, Augustini, sed apud Grecos late patet logos, nam et rationem et definitionem, et alia non nulla declarat, unde factum ut Graeci praesertim theologi, quorum vestigia secuti sunt Latini. So this means, he cites a sermo illa. In the beginning was sermo illa, i.e. hologos. Then Beza says, the Vulgate has verbum, that is, tohrema, which means, as Boyle said, a discrete unit of speech. And I'm translating Beza here, quod recte mutavit, which Erasmus correctly changed. But he was also relying upon the authority of the ancients, namely Cyprian, Lactantius, Hilary, Jerome, Ambrose, and Augustine. But among the Greeks, logos, he says, late patet, has a broader connotation. That's how I would take late patet. For it means speech, oratio, and reason, rationem, and definition, and several other things, alia non nulla. Therefore, it came to pass that the Greeks, especially the theologians, whose footsteps the Latins followed, interpreted this passage while wanting to explain in what sense the Son is called logos. And then he will go on to quote from Gregory Nazianzus, include some more Greek, etc. But Beza's main point is that Erasmus did the right thing. It's recte mutavit Erasmus. He correctly changed the reading from verbum to sermo.
Yeah.
He had good authority from the patristics, and he properly understood that logos, apud Grecos late patet, has greater extent of meaning. We would say a wider connotation.
Excellent. Well, hey, I think that's a good place to stop and
to put this one to rest
and wrap it up.
I agree. Is there a particular reason why we have to get out of the vomitorium?
Well, I mean, if you heard that banging up there,
yes, I did.
Right? So I heard a bunch of like toolboxes and
really
being rattled.
What's happening?
And people hauling in lumber.
Really?
So yes, it's this consortium of people building these small buildings to recite a verse in. It's the Shed Poets Society.
Really, the Shed Poets Society?
Yeah, exactly. I don't know if they've chosen our bunker. But
so what they do is they build independent little wooden lean-tos.
Yes.
And then in there they read their poetry?
They do. Wow. Exactly. The Shed Poets Society.
Wow, incredible.
They're an eccentric bunch. And
we better get out of here.
They're cranky, so let's get out of their way. Yeah.
But before we do, we have to do a few things,
we do.
Jeff?
Dave, tell us a bit about the Moss Method and your LLPSI programs.
Sure. Yep. So Moss Method for Greek is a program I've developed that will take you from
neophyte to erudite.
That's correct. If you know little or no Greek, I can help you know a lot of Greek and become really expert. I've been studying this language for a long time. I consider myself a veteran student. And when you're learning something challenging and unfamiliar, you need a more experienced guide, a psychopampos, to take you by the hand, lead you into the mysteries of the Greek language. So this is expert, self-paced, accessible. Go to mossmethod.com. Check out the program. I routinely run sales and discounts. We get together on Friday morning. We're reading some Xenophon together, some starter Xenophon.
All right.
And we've got folks from California. We have folks from Kansas, from Switzerland, from Australia, from New York, getting together to read some Greek. It's a lot of fun.
Fantastic. And you can also learn Latin.
Yes, you can.
Through your programs.
Hans Orberg's Lingua Latina per se illustrata, which I like to say is best translated as Latin teaches itself. Mm-hmm. You just stand by and learn. Go to my website, latinperdiem.com. Check out the program. I know there are many competitors out there. There are some good programs out there. Mine's not the only good one. But I do think mine is the best value because it's that combination of competency and expertise, accessibility, and a reasonable price.
And just as with the Moss Method, you have a lot of free stuff available.
I do.
How many Latin per diem videos do you have now?
We are right now at 2,000, more than 2,040.
Fantastic.
The current episode is on another 16th century guy, the current series, John Ecolampadius, House Lamp.
Is that what his name means?
Yeah, house lamp. He took a Greek name, house lamp.
Nice.
So I'm sure that he was always going around the house and flicking the lights off.
Yeah.
So it's on his work, The Joy of the Resurrection, De Gaudio Resurrectionis. So
very cool.
You can tune in and get lots of free Latin, and if you like it, you can pay for some too.
Sounds good.
Jeff, whom do we need to thank?
As always, Mishka, our great engineer who puts this together and slaps on the duct tape, but in a way that you can never see it.
Oh, it's beautiful. Work of art.
Scott Van Zen and Ken Tamplin, those guys with the screaming guitar, those are the geniuses behind the licks that you hear throughout the episode.
Makes us feel kind of hip and cool. We like that kind of music.
Exactly.
It's a nice combination of hopefully some substantive content with some lighthearted music to introduce it.
Absolutely.
All right.
And Dave, if people want to get in touch with us, what should they do?
They should write to jeff@adnauseam.com. Don't forget the V. That's the place for all your complaints and disgruntlements.
I can take it. And if you want to contact Dave, it's dave@adnauseam.com. Again, don't forget the V.
Go to our website.
Yes.
Pick up a T-shirt.
Yes, exactly. And write to Dave if you have all kinds of flowery flattery, because that makes him really uncomfortable. Yeah.
I like to say there are two things I don't handle well.
Yes. What are they again?
Praise and criticism.
That's right.
But get yourself a Quai No Kent Do Kent T-shirt. What Hurts Teaches in a nice Greek Otic vase theme. Jeff, next week, what do we have going on?
We have, I think for the third time now on the podcast, our friend, our former colleague and mentor, Ken Bratt.
He's like the Ed McMahon of this show, isn't he?
He is, and he's coming to talk about something right in his wheelhouse, at Herodotus.
Yeah, he wrote his dissertation on Herodotus. We have never covered Herodotus on this program, but it promises to be a delightful episode. Now, whatever happened to Anna Maria von Schoorman that we promised listeners last time?
Our interviewees, they had to reschedule.
Okay.
And so that's coming up in a week or two, I believe.
It's coming up, right? Yep. We didn't just cancel it.
No.
Okay.
No, I'm looking forward to that. Yep. And Dave, you have our gustatory parting shot today.
Yes, I do. And this comes from a poet named Khalil Gibran. And I'm going to read it. You know, I have to sometimes resist the urge to make fun of things. Okay. You don't have to, though, if you want to let loose on this one. I'm not really sure what to make of it.
This is the guy who wrote The Prophet, right? Isn't that right?
That sounds right.
Okay.
Yeah, not Salman Rushdie.
No.
No,
the Gibran.
Okay, Gibran. Okay. He says, "And when you crush an apple with your teeth, say to it in your heart, 'Your seeds shall live in my body, and the buds of your tomorrow shall blossom in my heart, and your fragrance shall be my breath, and together we shall rejoice through all the seasons.'"
But I'd never make it through a meal if I had to do that to everything on my plate.
all I can think when I come away from this is apple breath. Apple breath.
Apple breath, exactly.
Yeah.
Right. Wow.
Speaking of apple breath,
yeah.
Thanks for listening.
Thanks.